Chief Justice Roberts rebuked Trump for a comment he made about judge's decision on asylum. I don't recall the chief attacking Obama when that president rebuked Alito during a State of the Union. For a bit more context, the Washington Post back in 2015 said this, wondering why does President Obama criticize the Supreme Court so much? Correspondent Kristen Fisher is looking into the details tonight. Good evening, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, President Trump challenging individual judges and rulings here is nothing new. What's new and truly unprecedented is that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has finally responded. Tensions between the executive and judicial branch in the Trump administration, they've been building for some time, but it really boiled over when U.S. District Judge John Tigger, an Obama appointee, ruled against the administration's new asylum policies, effectively putting them on hold. As that caravan of migrants moved closer to the United States, President Trump tried to change U.S. asylum policy so that no one could apply for asylum if they entered the country illegally, that they had to apply for asylum at an official point of entry. But yesterday, Judge Tigger ruled against it, prompting this response from the president.
Every case that gets filed in the Ninth Circuit, we get beaten, and then we end up having to go to the Supreme Court, like the travel ban, and we won. The Ninth Circuit, we're going to have to look at that, because every case, no matter where it is, they file it practically, for all intents and purposes. They file it in what's called the Ninth Circuit. This was an Obama judge.
So that's what led to the Chief Justice's unprecedented rebuke. He told the Associated Press today that, quote, we do not have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them. Well, President Trump fired back with this, quote, sorry, Chief Justice John Roberts, but you do indeed have Obama judges, and they have a much different point of view than the people who are charged with the safety of our country. Tensions between the Chief Justice and President Trump, they go all the way back to the very early days of the 2016 campaign, when then-candidate Trump criticized the Chief Justice's decisive vote in 2012, which essentially saved Obamacare.
Let us down. What he did with Obamacare was disgraceful. And I think he did that because he wanted to be popular with inside the Beltway or something. He is so disappointing to me.
And remember, during the campaign, then-candidate Trump also referred to a U.S.-born judge of Mexican descent who was presiding over a lawsuit against Trump University. He referred to him as a Mexican who would not be able to rule fairly because of then-candidate Trump's proposal to build a wall on the southern border. So these kinds of attacks against the judiciary are nothing new, Shannon, but for the Chief Justice to respond, that has not happened until today. Shannon.
Right, you are. Kristen Fisher, thank you very much. All right, House Republicans are scrambling to finish up investigative work before they lose control of their committees early next year. That includes getting an update on the federal investigation into the Clinton Foundation. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge tells us what she's hearing tonight.
Why don't you give back the money? I think it would be a great gesture.
On the campaign trail, candidate Trump had harsh words for the Clinton Foundation.
It's a criminal enterprise. Saudi Arabia giving $25 million, Qatar, all of these countries.
Writing to Congress last spring, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions tapped a Utah federal prosecutor, John Huber, to probe the foundation which took tens of millions of dollars from foreign interests while Clinton was Secretary of State under President Obama. While the foundation set up by Clinton and her husband has consistently denied wrongdoing, House Republicans are now calling for Huber to testify about his findings. In a phone interview, Congressman Mark Meadows said the hearing will be public.
On December 5th, the Subcommittee on Government Operations will be holding a hearing where we'll request Mr. Huber or his designee to come in and testify, along with potentially a couple of whistleblowers based on previous conversations with the Department of Justice weeks ago. They had indicated that Mr. Huber was making good progress.
Meadows, chairman of the Freedom Caucus, said congressional investigators also have new records about the foundation's work.
There's at least a question of impropriety as it relates to the Clinton foundations, whether it's quid pro quo, whether it's improper use of charitable giving.
Along with the foundation, Huber is investigating allegations of surveillance warrant abuses targeting Trump campaign aide Carter Page. The Justice Department Inspector General is also investigating alleged surveillance abuses, as well as media leaks by the DOJ and FBI, to include former FBI Director James Comey and his memos about his meetings with the president. Fox News reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Utah and the Clinton Foundation, but there was no immediate response. With less than 6 weeks before the Democrats take over the House, the Huber testimony may be the Republicans' last chance to get Foundation evidence into the congressional record. Shannon?
Coming down to the wire. Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. All right. Incoming House Oversight Committee Chairman, Democrat Elijah Cummings, says his committee will investigate presidential advisors Ivanka Trump and her husband Jared Kushner in connection with the use of a private email account for official White House business. Quote, "We launched a bipartisan investigation last year into White House officials' use of private email accounts for official business, but the White House never gave us the information we requested," Cummings says in a statement. "We need those documents to ensure that Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, and other officials are complying with federal records laws." Okay, so we told you about Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley's tweet tonight, questioning why Chief Justice Roberts didn't publicly condemn President Obama's frequent criticism of the high court. It's all the latest development in a very public spat between Roberts and President Trump. Much to discuss with our legal eagles tonight. To weigh in, National Security Attorney, partner at Mark Zaid Law Firm, Bradley Moss, and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo. Welcome to you both.
How are you doing this evening?
Hi. Okay, so we showed that 2015 headline from the Washington Post asking why President Obama was constantly taking on the Supreme Court. So we want to play a couple of things to remind folks about how he did clash with the court publicly.
Last week, the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections.
I'm confident that the Supreme Court will not take what would be an unprecedented, extraordinary step of overturning a law that was passed by a strong majority of a democratically elected Congress.
Okay, that second clip there, he's referring to the Affordable Care Act at the time that the case had been heard and the justices were still behind closed doors, hashing it out and getting ready to write their opinions. The first one at the State of the Union, and he got that characterization of their ruling so wrong that even PolitiFact didn't buy it. I mean, Bradley, that's saying something.
Yeah, look. President Trump is not the first one to have had criticisms of the judiciary, to criticize particular rulings. But what you didn't hear in those clips that you just played, and what you wouldn't hear in clips if you pulled it from President Bush, was the petty, juvenile kind of, grade school mockery he uses, this Twitter commentary he pulls out, calling them so-called judges, saying they don't know what they're talking about, saying they don't care about national security. That, I think, that type of vitriol, that type of verbiage is what concerned the Chief Justice in my view, and is why the Chief Justice did this rather unusual thing to publicly respond and say there are no Obama judges or Trump judges. And that is something to be concerned about going forward.
John, give us some historical context, because, listen, these branches have had dust-ups before.
Yeah, John Roberts ought to grow up. He's a big boy. Judges are big boys and big girls. They have life tenure on their Constitution. They should not listen to what presidents do. Their only job, because they have life tenure, is decide the cases as they see them. President Trump follows, in response to your direct question, Shannon, a long line of presidents who have attacked judges, attacked the Supreme Court, and have done things much worse than President Trump. Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt tried to pack the court and add 6 justices to the Supreme Court because he didn't like the way the justices were trying to block the New Deal. So I think the real answer is John Roberts should just stick his fingers in his ears and stop listening to President Trump's taunts. He's almost playing into President Trump's political game.
Well, yeah, a lot of people are surprised that he would engage in any way, though he didn't mention the president by name. But obviously, as the head of the judiciary, he's going to be very defensive and protective of the way the judges are viewed across the board. Now, as to whether or not you can say someone is an Obama judge or a Trump judge, those kinds of things, we all know that presidents choose judges that agree with their judicial philosophy. Here's Rush Limbaugh on the idea of pretending that that's not so.
We sure as hell do. What the hell is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? That's where they all go. Everybody knows we have Obama judges. Obama has appointed left-wing hacks to act as judges.
Well, and Bradley, people would say that President Bush and President Trump, they pick people who line up with their judicial philosophies. But again, you wouldn't pick someone that you thought was going to go against the way that you view the Constitution, statutory interpretation, that kind of thing.
Of course not, but that's also a very simplistic view that the president has on how judges operate. I litigate before judges all the time. I've litigated before Bush judges, Clinton judges, Obama judges, and now Trump judges. And I can tell you, by and large, with a very small fraction of the cases, the judges are not what you would think of in terms of they're just doing their politicians' bidding. They apply the law as they saw it. That doesn't always go the way the original president who appointed them may have sought, but that's how they do their job, and it's the best interest of, the best view of how they see the law being applied there. And to just characterize them as Obama judges or Trump judges is simply not the reality of litigation.
Yeah, I mean, John, is that fair? Because, listen, judges, I think, they take an oath not to be partisan, not to serve any particular interest. We've seen judges rule against and justices rule against the presidents who've appointed them. They can absolutely be objective.
You know, the problem is we have to distinguish between partisanship and ideology. As you mentioned, one of the reasons we elect presidents and one of the main reasons conservatives supported President Trump was because he promised to appoint a certain kind of judge who would limit his discretion to the original meaning of the Constitution. And Obama judges and Clinton judges are picked on very different ideological grounds. It's not Democrat, Republican. It's just different ways of looking at the Constitution. And I'm afraid when you look at the lineup of judges who are resisting the president's immigration order here and the travel ban before, they all tend to have been appointed by Clinton and Obama judges, and the ones that upheld the ban tend to have been appointed by President Bush, Reagan, or now Trump. That is actually what the Constitution envisions because it gives the power to nominate justices in the president and gives their confirmation to an elected Senate. The framers didn't want our judges to be actually kind of nonpartisan, neutral people. They wanted the politics to be involved in their appointment.
Well, the fact is that these opponents of the president are no dummies. They file in the Ninth Circuit for a very specific purpose because they know their best chance is there. And that's just factual. All right. John and Bradley, thank you both and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Thanks, Shannon. Happy Thanksgiving.
All right. No Thanksgiving Eve show would be complete without us reporting on all the irritations of Thanksgiving travel. Unsurprisingly, there are traffic jams in Los Angeles, and the rain there is not helping things. Look at that. AAA expecting the number of drivers this holiday season will spike to the biggest number since 2005. Traffic trouble hitting the Bay Area as well. These are pictures from earlier tonight over Embryville, California. Now, if you are stuck behind the wheel and you need someone to blame other than yourself, well, here's what the president says in a tweet. You just can't win with the fake news media. A big story today is that because I've pushed so hard and gotten gasoline prices so low, more people are driving and I have caused traffic jams throughout our great nation. Sorry, everyone. That actually made me laugh. All right, AAA says while gas prices are dipping, they're still higher than they were this time last year. Be safe out there. It's not hours, we're told. Mattis's words there in the event of violence against Border Patrol agents. But Mattis also telling reporters tonight that the lethal force authorization is not the same as a lethal force request, which has to come from the Department of Homeland Security. Another key point, he says, the soldiers deployed to the border are unarmed.
There has been no call for any lethal force from DHS. So right away, I can say, going back to your earlier point, we don't have guns in their hands right now other than a couple of NCOs.
All right, the number of Americans citing immigration as a problem, the biggest problem in the U.S., is rising sharply. This is all according to a recent Gallup poll. They keep a running list and a running track of what people say are the top issues. Mentions of immigration as the nation's top problem are up 8 percentage points in just 1 month. Let's talk about it with tonight's Power Panel. Democratic strategist and partner at Forward Solutions Strategy, Isaac Wright, Fox News contributor, former acting ICE director Tom Homan, and the opinion editor of the Deseret News, former chief of staff to Senator Mike Lee, Boyd Matheson. Good to have you.
Good to be here.
All right, and Boyd, is it Deseret? I always think I'm going to get that wrong.
Deseret.
Deseret, okay,
Deseret
it's confirmed by the official who would know. Okay, so I want to start with this. From this order that was signed today by White House Chief of Staff General John Kelly, he says this: credible evidence and intelligence indicate that migrant caravans originating from Central America and moving toward the southern border of the United States may prompt incidents of violence and disorder that could threaten U.S. Customs and Border Protection and other U.S. government personnel. Tom, we're being told that statements like that are hyperbolic and they're really overplaying the real threat at the border.
Well, look, those statements are 100% accurate. I can guarantee you that. and I was director of ICE, and I know the law enforcement techniques they're using. I will not share them here on open air, but I can tell you that we know there's over 500 criminals in that one population. We know there's a lot of people that have been deported once before, and they're going to re-enter. If they re-enter illegally, that's a felony. So, look, there's a lot of intelligence. The President, the Secretary of Homeland Security have access to the most sophisticated intelligence in the world. And I know what law enforcement techniques they're using. You can count, be sure that that data is correct, what's being reported.
Okay, so I want to also point to a Monmouth poll asking about the seriousness of the illegal immigration problem. In this new numbers just out in November, the numbers are up. 70% of people in America that they talk to consider it a somewhat serious or very serious problem. Isaac.
I hope Republicans keep reading those polls. Clearly, they were the polls they were reading going into Election Day. Every poll I saw said Americans' #1 concern was health care leading up to the election and since then. And given the election results and 40 U.S. House seats picked up for Democrats, if Republicans want to keep following those polls, I encourage them to do it.
Did you like what happened in the Senate?
I think in the Senate map, I think we did as well as we could have expected or better given the map of what Senate seats were up this year.
Okay, so let's
pick up in the U.S. House, 7 seats flipped in the gubernatorial offices, and 300 to 700 seats I think I've read picked up in legislatures across the country.
Much better for a sitting incumbent president in their first midterm than we have seen for others in the past. But that's another debate. So let's get back to immigration. Another part of this order signed by General Kelly says this: deployed military personnel may perform activities that are reasonably necessary to ensure the protection and safety of federal personnel, including a show or use of force, including lethal force where necessary, crowd control, temporary detention, and cursory search. But Boyd, we are told by the defense secretary himself, these guys are not armed.
Yeah, I think we have to be very careful, Shannon, in terms of looking at how this plays in the political rhetoric space as opposed to the reality of what's happening at the border. The American citizens are concerned for sure, but the thing that we have to remember is that we can solve 94% of the immigration issue in an afternoon on the floor of the House and the Senate. And we should call on Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell on the first day they're in session. They could get this done before the sun goes down because it's political, and people use it to raise hundreds of millions of dollars every single year. Both political parties and campaigns and outside groups raise the money. They use it as a wedge issue to win campaigns. You've just talked about that. But we have to get back to, look, everyone agrees we need border security. We need a better entry-exit system. We need to redo the visa process. Everybody agrees on all of those things. But it's the politics that's getting in the way. And that's what we have to unmask for the American people. We've got to expect more from both parties. This is not left or right. This is the people in power making sure they stay in power on both sides of the aisle.
But what about the average Americans, Boyd? I mean, about people who are impacted by this on a daily basis in their real lives. They elect these people and send them here.
Yeah, and that's one of the real challenges, because you're right, Shannon. This is a we the people problem. While Congress has an approval rating of only 11%, that's lower than the influenza virus. We re-elected 90% of incumbents back into office. So citizens have to say, yes, this is impacting my life and my world, and we need to do things just a little bit different.
Okay.
We did have a sweeping change in the U.S. House, though, and given the fact Republicans have controlled the White House and both chambers of Congress for 2 years and completely failed at addressing this issue, hopefully there is hope to do so now.
Just as the Democrats did under President Obama, they had 2 years to get it done, too, where they controlled both houses and the president was in charge. So Democrats and Republicans alike are not into solving this problem in a serious way.
And if I could finish what I was going to say, and as we know, there are 750,000 cases right now in backlog of asylum seekers. There are somewhere estimates between 5,000 and 10,000 people in this caravan seeking asylum in the United States from persecution overseas. According to every credible report, it's mostly poor people. It's mostly folks fleeing from bad situations, trying to seek the American dream.
Okay.
We owe it, if we're going to be a global leader, to do the right thing and process those cases. And if people are criminals, send them home. But if they're here legitimately as asylum seekers, we should do that officially, get them here. To do that, we got to fix the system that has 750,000 backlog in cases right now.
I mean, Tom, that has been a problem that has been building for generations. I mean, it is something that's not going to go away. You saw it firsthand. But is there a difference between people coming here for a better economic opportunity, legally or illegally, and those who are coming simply because the conditions in their country are truly violent and they actually need asylum. I mean, we know the fraction of cases that are actually approved after asylum hearings are really low, and a lot of times those people are already in the country and they're not coming back.
Look, bottom line is your last speaker is just wrong. I mean, the data speaks for itself. Yeah, a lot of them are fleeing poverty. I get it, and certainly feel bad for these people. But 89 to 90%, 89 to 90% of Central Americans claim asylum lose their case in front of a judge. That is just a stone cold fact. Now, if they can stand in line with millions of other people that stand in line for 10 to 12 years to come to this country. But asylum has, the law is clear on asylum. You have to be escaping fear and persecution for your political views, your race, or religion. Fleeing poverty, unfortunately, doesn't qualify for asylum. And I agree. And the speaker was talked about Congress. I agree with him 100%. What I've been saying for a year and a half. The reason that caravans on the border is because Congress had failed American people. They have not closed the loopholes that raise the asylum bar, give ICE a number of beds so they're not catch and release. People think they're going to get released when they get across the border. I mean, they could have fixed a lot of this stuff. A Florida settlement agreement. Let's detain families more than 20 days. Congress has failed American people, and that's why the caravan's here. And as far as the Democrats, when they start talking about abolishing ICE, let's support sanctuary cities. That entices people to come to this country. So, you know, there's a lot of blame to go around. But I tell you what, we have a president that's taking this seriously. I've worked for 6 of them. This president's taking the border security. He made a promise to protect our border and protect the sovereignty of this country. And that's exactly what he's doing. And I applaud him for it.
Well, it upsets a lot of people. He upsets a lot of people. I mean, when presidents or anybody touch this, it's almost a third rail situation. When you actually talk about the border, although people will say they want secure borders, when you talk about specific things like cracking down, turning back families, building walls, that's where the rubber meets the road. And a lot of politicians, as we've discussed across the political spectrum, can't get this done because it becomes such a contentious issue. We didn't solve it tonight, but I do hope all of you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and maybe you can discuss or not around the Thanksgiving table tomorrow. Isaac, Tom, and Boyd.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
Thanks,
you
Shannon.
too. Thanks.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Or to win for President Trump on the international stage at Interpol, coming up next.
We encourage all nations and organizations that are part of Interpol and that respect the rule of law to choose a leader with credibility and integrity that reflects one of the world's most...
At all. Well, it's being called a foreign policy win for the Trump administration. A South Korean official has defeated a Russian general in the race for the presidency of Interpol. Correspondent Ellison Barber has more on what it means tonight. Hello.
Hi, Shannon. So this win came as a pretty big surprise. Russia's Alexander Prokopchuk, a longtime veteran of Russian security services, was favored to win and lead the world's largest international police organization. A bipartisan group of U.S. senators wrote a letter encouraging the Trump administration and members of Interpol's General Assembly to oppose Prokopchuk. They accused Russia of exploiting Interpol's red notices, alerts that flag suspects for arrest all around the world to settle political scores and harass opponents, dissidents, and journalists. Alexander Prokopchuk, the letter said, has been personally involved in this intimidation strategy. South Korea's Kim Jong-yang secured support from at least 2/3 of Interpol's 190-plus member countries a day before the Interpol vote. The White House publicly came out against Prokopchuk and endorsed Kim. The U.S. Secretary of State encouraged other member states to support Kim as well.
Choose a leader with credibility and integrity that reflects one of the world's most critical law enforcement bodies. We believe Mr. Kim will be just that.
Britain lobbied against Prokopchuk, as did other European governments. Some countries said they would consider leaving Interpol if Prokopchuk won. Kim secured support from at least 2/3 of Interpol's agency, which we actually already told you about. So we'll skip down from that, tell you that Russia is not disputing the results, but they are accusing the U.S. and others of election interference. Take a listen.
Certainly, the election was held in an environment of unprecedented pressure and interference.
Critics of the Kremlin say that Moscow would have turned Interpol into a weapon to track down whoever they want.
This Russian will be acting on the instructions of Vladimir Putin to put his representative in charge of the most important international crime-fighting organization is like putting the mafia in charge.
Countries like Russia, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, and China have long been accused of trying to use Interpol and red notices for nefarious purposes. The last Interpol president actually went missing in China. The government said they detained him on bribery charges. His wife says it was political persecution, and she thinks he might be dead. This election put all of those issues back in the spotlight. Some watchdog groups are now calling on Interpol to take more steps to strengthen their rules and prevent abuse. Shannon?
Yeah, this is a really important story that's flown under the radar for a lot of people. It's been a very newsy day.
Yes.
Thanks, Allison. All right, an American missionary killed after apparently traveling to an island inhabited by an isolated tribe. That story leads where in the world? Police say John Allen Chow, who you see here, was killed by an isolated Indian island tribe known to shoot outsiders down with bows and arrows. He felt it was his mission to go there. Well, 7 fishermen have been arrested for helping the American visit North Sentinel Island, where the killing occurred. To Italy now, where police arrested an Egyptian man accused of supporting the Islamic State. Officials say the 22-year-old suspect is the latest of more than 300 alleged jihadist sympathizers to be kicked out of Italy since 2015. Hundreds of anti-riot police clashing with student protesters in Venezuela. Police dispersed tear gas to break up the students rallying at the Central University in Caracas, calling for better conditions at all the nation's universities. Colombia seeking to ease tensions at a migrant camp with a soccer game between Colombians and Venezuelans. The efforts come after more than a dozen Venezuelan migrants were expelled from the camp after they reportedly looted supplies and clashed with riot police. And children who gasped their last breath because of him. Let's bring back tonight's Power Panel to debate. Isaac Wright and Boyd Matheson return. Joining them now, radio host on WMAL in Washington, associate opinion editor at the Washington Times, a very busy man, Larry O'Connor. He made time for us. Good to see all of you again.
You bet, Shannon. Good to be back. Shannon.
Okay, so Larry, I'm just going to put that out there. I'll let you start us off.
Yeah, you know, we've reached this ludicrous time here in Washington, D.C., where you've got the nuance of Kelsey Gabbard using profanity with regard to this really complicated issue. I mean, I'm sorry. I know that people want things to be black and white. It's like, oh, okay. The CIA thinks the Saudi government is responsible for Khashoggi's murder, and he could very well be. And therefore, what? We're supposed to cut all ties to this kingdom? We're supposed to force the ouster of their head of state? That worked really well for us in Libya, didn't it? The fact of the matter is, this is complicated. We have a very tenuous relationship in that region. Iran is involved. Oil prices globally are involved. This is a complicated issue, and the fact of the matter is the president did put personal sanctions on 17 different Saudi nationals who are suspected to be part of this crime. Not dissimilar to what President Obama did with regard to individual Russians who were involved in the illegal annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. I mean, that's the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula compared to the murder of this one person. Neither of those acts are good. Neither of them call for, you know, swift and draconian action. Sometimes a commander-in-chief, a head of state, has to do some complicated maneuverings. And I think the president is doing that
Well,
here.
there's bipartisan pushback, or those who think the president should have gone much farther in his comments that he made yesterday. That includes Senator Republican Lindsey Graham, who is a very close confidant and ally of the president on many things, but he thinks there needed to be a tougher line. Here's what he said.
We've got a historic opportunity here to tell the people in the Mideast there's a new sheriff in town. If you disrespect us and you trample over civilized norms, you're going to pay a price.
And Graham, like some others, Isaac, has made this distinction between the Saudi Arabian kingdom and the crown prince, suggesting that they need to get rid of the crown prince. He can't be the leader and us continue the same kind of relationship that we've had. Do you think there's any possibility that change happens?
I hope so. I hope that I think Lindsey Graham and some others have introduced some legislation to try to force the administration to levy sanctions against the crown prince. They need to. This was clearly a murder effort that was, by all accounts and sources, was linked back to the crown prince. This is something wrong. Right and wrong should not be complicated by oil prices, and it's shameful that Donald Trump looks at it that it is.
All right. One of the things that got him in the most heat yesterday were his comments, both written and verbally, he said, of the crown prince and whether he ordered this. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, and we may never have enough facts to know. There are those who say the CIA has been much more specific about it than that. We have now a letter from Senators Corker and Menendez, the top Republican and Democrat on the Foreign Relations Policy Committee, saying this to the president. They reference an October 10th letter they initially sent wanting a determination regarding sanctions under the Magnitsky Act. They add this. We request that your determination specifically address whether Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is responsible for Mr. Khashoggi's murder. We expect to receive your determination within 120 days of our original request. I mean, Boyd, this is a bipartisan request to the president. Be clear about what you think about the Crown Prince's involvement in this murder.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we have to be careful of in this, Shannon, is we have to be careful of the fallacy of the false choice in all of this. We do need to have sanctions in terms of the murder, absolutely, and we need to be able to deal with other things in the region, like Iran and Yemen. The real leadership quality for the 21st century is how do you deal with allies and alliances? In other words, how do you go against people on certain issues, but then align with them on others? We see that with Russia and China. We're going to compete against them when it comes to freedom, election tampering, copyright infringement, and all of those things. But they're also critical allies in dealing with North Korea. We see the same things in Europe. We're going to compete on trade and tariffs, but we also need to align with them on human rights and a host of other things. And so we have to be very careful of this false choice premise that, again, our politics leads us into. It's allies and alliances. And this is one area where President Trump's ability to be transactional is actually helpful, that he can say, OK, I'm going to compete on this, or I'm going to sanction against that, or I'm going to drive a wedge here, but then I'm going to come together on the things that are in America's best interest.
Yeah, Larry, and that's
Folks,
one of the things.
This administration has abdicated our role as a global leader, and now we are abdicating our role as a moral leader.
In what sense, though, Isaac? In what sense? Because there are those who would say, there are those who would say, well, okay, on that specific issues, but there are others who would say they elected this president to do exactly what he has done, which is to do things like pull out of the Paris Climate Trade Agreement, to get out of the Iran nuclear deal, which a lot of people have massive questions about. But Larry,
there's $135 trillion at stake.
By all means, I'm so glad that
Fox is getting you your own show tonight. Hold on, because we can't hear any of you if you're going to do this. Guys, gentlemen, we could just kill mics. We could just do that. Guys. Okay, let's do this one at a time so we can hear from you. Larry, we'll start with you. Isaac, you'll get your time.
Yeah, I think he's had plenty of time. Shannon, you're right. And I think that we should all downshift on the hubris here, because let's face it, like it or not, we don't have a great track record in that region forcing the ouster of leaders. Do we forget the moral clarity that we had during the Arab Spring that forced Gaddafi out, and how wonderful that was for Libya and for our interests there? The fact of the matter is, Shannon, you're absolutely right. This president did not run on the idea that he was going to spread American ideals around the world. Now, you may not like that, but he ran on the idea that we're going to enter into alliances that are benefiting us.
Make sure I get Isaac in here before we're out of time.
Oh, yeah, because he didn't have enough to say.
Well, we want to give him fair time here.
America should be a shining light on a hill. We should not cover it. We should not put the light under a bushel. We should export the American ideals first and foremost to the globe.
Boyd, can we do that? Can we thread that needle quickly?
We can thread that needle. We've done it historically, and we need to do it again. And it takes everybody putting aside, again, the fallacy of the false choice is the problem. We can do it because compassion, rule of law, all of those things are American values, and we can thread that needle.
All right, we'll have all three of you back, and we will have our own summit and figure it all out. In the meantime, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
All right.